Hi everyone, welcome. Very much for coming. It seems to be like a universally cold grey night in every possible part of the country. I'm, as Kate has said, I'm co-chair of Equality and Diversity for the Guild, which is a fairly new committee. And I'm part of the Disability Steering Committee, which has put this Zoom together and has other projects going on too. That's a very new thing for the Guild. We should have been doing it a long time ago. We're doing it now. And I think one thing to say is, as a panel, we're going to try and be succinct because there are a lot of us and there are going to be a lot of questions to field. But this is almost like an apology in advance. I think I'm not the only one of us who's found the process of coming together to plan this actually very emotional, because the nature of being a disabled writer is quite often quite isolated. I mean, quite often hiding things actually, or you're being very tactical about how you reveal them because you need to work. And so to actually be in a group where that part of who one is as a writer can be shared has been a really powerful thing. So as I say, we'll try and be succinct, but if a bit of energy breaks the banks, we apologise in advance. I'd like especially to thank Kate, who's moved mountains. We've done this at fairly short notice. And especially among our committee, Annalisa Dinnella, who has moved similar parallel mountains. I think that's it really. I always wanted to say these lines. It is my pleasure to introduce someone who needs no introduction. We have the excellent Jack Thorne, who is chairing this session. Apart from being an amazing writer with a range, which I think is like unparalleled ever, as far as I know. He's perhaps slightly less well known as being just, a very good supporter of a lot of righteous things. So it's a particular pleasure to do this. And I'd like to hand over to Jack, please, with kind of a question, because I know your disability isn't something that you've ever hidden, but it's kind of felt like to me, it's been a more explicit part of you as a writer and as a person over the last couple of years. So I'm just really interested in, you're very welcome indeed to our club, but why especially now?
Hello everyone. So I suppose I've always felt like that question of whether you are a legitimate disabled person or not is a very, very difficult one, and one I've struggled with for a very long time, actually, right from the start. That I went to a Grey Eye Open Day in 2005 and was welcomed, and actually that felt really important to me. But ever since then, it's sort of been like, oh, do I belong? Do I not belong? What do I do? How do I behave? Do you know what I mean? That, and all that stuff. And then I was involved in a casting conversation for a show that I'd written, and a good friend of mine said of the actor, who they knew that was a friend of mine and they knew was someone I was very passionate about as an actor, said of them, but we don't want to expose them. And I found that statement so problematic in so many different ways, particularly coming from a friend. And it actually made me angrier than a lot of the very explicit ableism that I've encountered in my career. And since then, I've just kind of gone, okay, it's time to be as angry as possible about this and to be explicit about this and to kick hard. And I think it's a difficult thing to do. And I know we've all been trying to do it for a very, very long time. Your Soundproof, by the way, Sukey, was one of the most important films I watched when I was sort of trying to work out how to write this stuff. It's an amazing film. If you haven't seen it, it's beautiful. Yeah, and I think that question is the one that we're all sort of grappling with, which is, how do we fight? And the interesting thing is that it does seem like we're finally getting a bit of a window, and organisations like BAFTA, with the amazing work that David's doing there, and the BFI and everyone else is starting to take us a bit more seriously than we previously did. But there's still the case that you sit on panels, you know, I'm part of a huge number of panels, and people talk about targets and people talk about all these different sorts of things, and then nothing bloody happens. And so this is a fighting group as well as a working group, I think, and it's wonderful to be part of this fighting group for a little bit. One thing I was told that might be useful as a framing device for this conversation, and I'm going to be talking as little as possible because these panelists are amazing and they should be doing the bulk of the talking. But a framing device for this is the social model of disability. And for those that don't know, and I'm sure most people do, the social model of disability basically says that disability isn't an impairment, it isn't a difference, it's the way that society treats disability. So institutions that are not set up to be welcoming are the problem, and that's what we need to address. And that's what this fighting group is fighting for, because the TV industry is full of a lot of bollocks where this stuff is concerned, and we need to change that. So to get straight on with it, and the panelists, by the way, because there's so many, the idea is that the panelists will introduce themselves as they are answered a question. That I've got questions that they're specifically going to be asked, rather than go around the group and then everyone forget who everyone is before they then answer their questions. So me not introducing them is not me being rude to them, it's me doing what I'm told. So the first question, there is a lot of talk in the TV industry amongst showrunners and producers about their desire to work with talented disabled talent, and yet the thing that you frequently hear is, but we don't know where to find them. The answer is often talent schemes, like the Writers Access Group at BBC Writers' Room. So it felt like a good way to start this session is by putting those schemes under the spotlight. They're clearly helpful in some ways. Are they unhelpful in other ways? And Charlie, why don't you start by answering that?
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you, Jack. My name is Charlie Swinbourne. I'm a script writer. Yeah, I was part of the BBC Writers' Room Writers Access Group, and from the beginning, the BBC always said that this would lead to jobs. It was about jobs. It was about work, and certainly parts of the scheme really led towards that. And just to give us a sense of what the scheme was, it was 12 months where probably about 12 disabled writers, we went to different sections of the BBC, or people came to us in London, and we'd get to know people from radio, from comedy, drama, continuing drama. And so we really got to make more contacts, and we got a lot of teaching, and we got a lot of sense of what they were looking for. And we were then able to kind of, push ourselves forward. For me, it really led to a real breakthrough in my career, because I was able then to get to co-write an episode of Casualty with Sophie Woolley, who I believe is also who's also here watching this, which was amazing for both of us. I pitched a storyline to EastEnders involving a deaf character becoming part of the square, and that happened. And I've also written for Children's BBC, and I've written for Moving On as well, for Jimmy McGovern's Moving On. So for me, in the last 18 months, I've really been able to do a lot of work on for the BBC at kind of that level, having previously made a lot of content for deaf audiences, which I see as having the same value, but just to be able to work on a different kind of platform has been incredible for me. I think in terms of schemes more widely, what you do find is that there's a great many schemes, and you can find, I certainly know disabled writers who've gone from one scheme to another, and that's not led to particularly to opportunities or to work. And you can get a sense that some of these organisations are applying for funding to give training to disabled writers, perhaps, but without that really having any connection with what goes on beyond that. And I think it's really disheartening to disabled writers when they do get onto all these schemes, but they find that, you know, they're not able to gain access or to gain opportunities. So I think some people I know they've certainly said the time for schemes has ended. You know, the time now is for actual opportunities and to move forward. And I think on my own personal level, I feel like once you actually get some opportunities and start making some work, for me, that's when the real learning begins. I think there's only so much you can learn on any scheme. I think it's when you're actually really doing it that you take on the next level of learning. So I've said a few things there, and I'll pass back and try and give someone else the chance to speak. But I think schemes can have their place, but it's all about what they lead to.
What Charlie didn't say is he's just been nominated for a Rose d'Or for his work on Casualty, which is absolutely amazing. David, now David has just made his broadcast TV debut as a writer on Doctors. So do you want to talk about this too?
Yes, I've kind of recovered from the shock of seeing the first thing go out. So hi, my name is David Proud, and I'm a writer and actor. I also sit on the BAFTA Film Committee and the steering group of the BFI. And I was with Charlie on the BBC Writers' Room, and I think the difference with that scheme is that it had a tangible outcome and a tangible something for the person. I think there's been quite a lot of people that have made quite a lot of money training disabled people over the years, and some things haven't had a tangible outcome. And I think with writing, the great thing is that you just need a spec script. So it's very clear, you know, any scheme that provides a spec script that you can then, you know, put out in the world is brilliant. So anything that can support that with script editors. But I've talked to other disabled artists that have had like 15 years training. You know, they could be a doctor and a lawyer by now, but they're still not being trusted to do long form drama, which is just absolutely bonkers. So I think if you're just doing training, you're compounding this problem of finding talented people and then giving them no opportunity to work beyond that. We always need training and schemes for entry level and kind of mid level, but I think it's kind of time to put a spotlight a little bit on the industry and say, okay, what about these people that have been doing these amazing courses and bits? What's happening now with their commissions? And it's really lovely seeing Charlie, seeing the different members of the Writers Access Group kind of making content now. And I think we're really on the cusp of disabled-led content, and it's really cool. But I'm with you, Jack. We have to just keep kind of yelling and just keep that pressure up, because now's the time. And if we do it, we've solved it for every generation to come.
Sorry, I don't know how to use the mute function. Absolutely. I'm going to keep going because I think that's brilliant. And I think that's really food for thought. But I think the next question is probably the most important question, and what you just talked about is in relation to that question. But I think it's the crucial one, and it's this session is called "Blow the Bloody Doors Off," and this question is the bloody door and how to get through it. And lots of writers, non-disabled writers and disabled writers, talk about how difficult it is to get through that door. But for many disabled writers, the problem is quite literal and quite brutal. And I think that question is to access barriers, and how writers have used their cunning, their guile, their intelligence, their wit to get through them is the most crucial question of all. Annalisa, do you want to talk about access to work and how this whole thing functions?
Yes. So my name's Annalisa Dinnella, and I write for TV and radio, and my impairment is visual. So I have about 5% vision and I use a white cane, but my condition is degenerative. So my kind of access barriers change through time. It's a kind of fluid landscape for me with all sorts of new exciting barriers popping up all the time. So I'm always on the lookout for interesting hacks and solutions and sharing tips with my wonderful disabled friends on how on earth to solve quite a few logistical conundrums that many of us have to solve on a daily basis. For me, the kind of short answer to what helps me overcome access barriers is a thing called access to work, which I think is really important to talk about, just in case any of you guys don't know about it. Access to work is a pot of money that exists in the Department of Work Pensions, and it exists, the function of it is to cover the cost of access for disabled professionals. So I think that sometimes there's perhaps an unspoken fear among employers and producers that working with a disabled person might cost money, and that absolutely need not be the case and is not the case. So I have been using Access to Work now for about 18 months. I have a pot of money which covers transport costs and covers my ability to use an access worker when I need one. And an access worker is just another human being who is sort of an extra pair of eyes for me when my eyes won't give me the information that I need them to. It's a real game changer. It allows me to participate in my industry in a way that I simply would not be able to without it. I think it's not perfect. I think there are probably many disabled people here right now who'd want to talk about perhaps the frustrations they've experienced with it. I think there's room for improvement, but I absolutely think that it's something to be treasured and protected at all costs, because without access to work, many of us would be at a significant disadvantage. I think the second thing just to mention about overcoming barriers is I'm going to use very heavy-handed door metaphor now. So as someone who can't see, I really struggle with glass revolving doors. And those are the threshold guardians that adorn the frontage of New Broadcasting House, Old Broadcasting House, Force Ferry Road, ITV. I spend a lot of time stressing about how I'm going to get through that glass revolving door. And it was only recently that one of my wheelchair using friends alerted me to the existence of the magic button. So to be very heavy-handed about this, you don't need to solve all those problems alone. I think being part of the disabled community is part of realizing that perhaps someone out there has a magic button that you don't know about. And I think for me, when I was part of the scheme at the BBC, one of the most enriching parts of that was those incredible solution-focused conversations that I had with other disabled creatives. And that was very much part of, I think, what Sukey wanted to achieve with this webinar today, is just to start that conversation so that we can talk to each other, we can witness each other modeling really brilliant access solutions, and so many of those barriers will just melt away.
Absolutely. And I mean, access to work is under risk. It feels like, and is constantly under risk, and you know, has gone through cuts and might go through other cuts. But there is a lot of ignorance about it in the industry too, in terms of when you're talking about casting disabled talent in a role or hiring disabled talent for a writer's room, and people are unaware that it's even out there to help cover those costs for producers who, you know, are ignorant largely to this problem. But I love the idea of the magic button. Tom, can you talk a bit about agents and how that whole thing has worked for you?
Yeah, hi everyone, lovely to have you all here, thanks for coming. I'm Thorne Wentworth. I write mainly for theatre but also for TV, and yeah, I'm another one, sorry, from the Writers Access group, sorry about that. And I suppose my journey was that getting through the door, I decided that the only way I could do that was on a different BBC scheme, which was to become a script editor. So I started on the BBC's Extend scheme for disabled talent and kind of went in that way. But even then, even being on that scheme, I then ended up not really knowing that much about my own access requirements, to be honest, and not sort of acknowledging that I needed a great deal. And so I go to these meetings, and I was thinking this morning about this afternoon, thinking what was my worst general meeting with an Indian. I think the worst one went to one of those big townhouses, you know, with hundreds of steps. And I hadn't told anyone that I, you know, couldn't get up these steps. So I started going up the steps before the meeting, and I just fell down them, just backwards down these steps. And the person I was due to meet came down to try and find me because I'd buzzed in and they thought it's taking a long time, and found me just flailing on the floor, you know, and I'm trying to do the whole, oh, hi, I'm Tom, I'm here to keep my cool. And it was just, the meeting was just over. That was it. And it was after that that I sort of thought, no, I need to butt my ideas up here and find some sort of strategies to do that. And so I was lucky enough by that point, and I was a long way into writing. By that point, I had an agent. And so I said, I need you to write in to any sort of, I need you to write the email for me when I'm going for a general meeting and say these things for me, because I was too scared to do it myself. And I know that not everyone's got that luxury. So I am talking from a place of privilege there, having someone who could do that. But then also going on, when if I was lucky enough to get a job, I would have those written into my contract, and that would come out of Access to Work and all the things that Annalisa would say. And it's amazing how much easier it was when it was down in black and white. It suddenly became a much easier proposition. So I've sort of done it like that. But if I'm scared of you know, putting my foot forward and saying, this is what I need, and I'm much better at it now than I was, I just think of myself flailing and lying on the floor at the bottom of those stairs and think, no, that's not how I want to make my entrance. Thank you very much. I want to just glide in and glide out. So that's what I've been trying to do.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Now neurodivergent writers are a completely different thing, and I know that there is the disabled community is a large community, and often the thing of like, okay, what is disabled, what isn't disabled becomes a massive question for people. It was a question that I dealt with, as I said, and I think often neurodivergent writers feel excluded from disability conversations, and so it would be really brilliant for Nicola if you could talk about this and what barriers you faced.
Hi everyone, my name's Nicky Werenowska. I'm a neurodivergent playwright. I have dyspraxia, ADHD and ASD. I'm gonna outline neurodivergency and say why it matters, and then I'm going to share my personal journey and the barriers I faced with you, and then try and give a wider sense of the barriers that neurodivergent writers face, drawing on my integrated playwriting work, my work with neurodivergent writers, and my professional experience as a trainer and activist in neurodivergency. One of the biggest barriers is that people often don't know what neurodivergency is, and why should they? It's not something that's widely explained or talked about. And this is partly historic in that our understanding of these conditions is relatively new and constantly evolving. For example, dyspraxia only entered the British Medical Encyclopedia in the mid-1990s, some 5 years after my first breakdown from undiagnosed dyspraxia, when I was misdiagnosed with every conceivable mental health illness there is. So just to clarify, neurodivergency is an umbrella term for a group of conditions or learning profiles that affect short-term memory, auditory processing, organisation and concentration. And it includes conditions that everyone will have heard of, like dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, OCD, ASD. And although all of these have separate diagnostic criteria, what unites them is those shared traits and the fact that development is not typical. And of course, every child's development will be unique, but ND children are those who don't hit the set milestones in learning and development. But for me, what I find particularly useful when talking to people about neurodivergency is the concept of having an uneven profile of abilities. So, for example, the child who won't get apostrophes but can write amazing poems, or who can't zip their coat up but can speak 3 languages fluently. Neurodivergency matters because these conditions continue to be misunderstood and undiagnosed. And in this misunderstanding, people fall through the net, and particularly women. And I could say a lot more about that, but I think there's no time here. It matters because the current education system has this kind of obsession, I think, with English language and maths at the exclusion of other subjects, particularly creative subjects. And this fails ND children, you know, arguably all children, but without an understanding that children learn in different ways and a resource curriculum to support this, as a culture and as an industry, we risk losing a significant cohort of the workforce. I think as an industry, we're missing talent and losing potential, and this includes writers. So now come on to my journey. You know, I always wanted to be a writer, and when I was 16, I wrote a play, and it was a runner-up in the Royal Court Young Playwrights competition. And I knew then that, that I wanted to be a writer, but it took me another 15 years before I wrote another play. And people often ask me, why didn't you do it before? And the answer is really simple. I was scared because I felt different to other people. There were all these things I couldn't do, simple things, practical things, little things that other people found or seemed to find so easy. Writing neatly, colouring inside the boxes, tying shoelaces, doing zips and buttons, not losing things, not forgetting things, turning a key in a lock, catching a ball, knowing which is my left hand and which is my right, and I still don't know that, riding a bike, following dance steps. Now, none of those things on their own seem that important, but there were so many of them that altogether they made my life very difficult, and other people didn't understand, and they weren't always kind, and some people were very unkind, and all of this made me feel not very confident. And to be a writer, you need to be confident and believe in yourself, and I didn't. But my life went on and it was okay. And then when I was 29, after a second breakdown, I saw a counsellor who identified my dyspraxia and changed my life in a moment and forever. And I began to write plays. I joined a playwriting group at the Mercury Theatre, and after 6 months, they put my play on, and so it began. I was lucky to go on to have lots of plays produced, and to have the support of theatre professionals, of theatres, including Grey Eye, which was really crucial to me feeling out about my disability. Sorry, to me feeling confident to be out about my disability. I think the thing is, although my diagnosis gave me the confidence to start playwriting, it took me another, I don't know, 7 or 8 years before I had the confidence to own it in a theatre context. And I think that's, you know, what Jack was saying about labellism and all those kinds of issues. So up to that point, I would hide it. But it made my life more difficult by hiding it. So to give you an example, I had a show on at Hampstead Theatre for 6 weeks in 2012. And whenever I watched it, if the actors missed a word, I would immediately clock it, not because my ego is so big that I read my script all the time, but because that's how my neurodivergent brain works. I memorize text effortlessly, but I never know what scene comes next because I can't sequence. And in rehearsals, I feel really embarrassed about that, and I try and hide it. So I'd really like to see a world where neurodivergent writers feel okay to take on help-seeking behaviours and ask for the support they need, and where the industry is able to respond to that. I feel I'm running out of time, but just to come on to a general list of barriers for neurodivergent writers. Confidence, I could have stressed that. And okay, many writers lack confidence, but I think we really need to acknowledge that neurodivergent writers will often come with a past of being told they're rubbish, and will be reluctant to show work as they fear criticism. Age and late entry is a real factor. Neurodivergent writers tend to be older, often because the education system has failed them. And certainly in theatre, it's harder to enter the industry when you're older, I think. Owning your disability, disclosure, neurodivergent writers worry about prejudice. I still get comments like, but I thought you were really clever, or how come you've got a PhD? And labelling, I think we've talked about that a bit, and I know there's a question about that and about pigeonholing later. Organisation, limited or impaired organisation is common to most neurodivergent profiles. And I think writers struggle with time management of, well, the general time management of freelancing, as well as the organisation of the particular piece of writing. Admin is another huge issue that I think blocks neurodivergent writers entering theatre. I regularly support writers to write Arts Council applications, because sometimes they simply can't because they don't have those skills. Being non-linear or a circular thinker, which most neurodivergent writers are, can really affect process. So talking about structure, and it seems to me that TV writing, which I'm just starting to explore, is quite a linear process, or you have to go through certain linear processes before you get to write your script. Talking about things like writing a pitch and writing a scene by scene. It's not that neurodivergent writers can't do that, but maybe that they need extra support because linear thought processing takes longer. Other things, networking. I can't remember anyone's name ever. Many writers with ASD may not want to be social. Meetings. I suffer from sensory overload. I think a lot of people do, which is when I will zone out, and so I'm always worried that I'm going to zone out and miss something, lose concentration in an important moment. I'm really well, I've gone over time, so I'm going to stop there. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really important, I think, and so I think needed that time. So thank you very much, Nicky. Lots of people are asking brilliant questions in the boxes. Please remember it's there. Tom is rather brilliantly fielding all those questions so that then I ask them at the end. So please keep asking them. The horror of networking, by which I mean parties, pub gatherings, all those horrible things that I can't cope with. They're also frequently in arenas that are not suitable for disabled talent, and they frequently involve activities that feel very far away. But the disabled world is starting to fight that and starting to come up with networking of its own. And Annalisa, you're going to talk about the mighty DANC.
Yes, so it's really lovely to hear you use the word horrible next to networking, Jack, because if you hate networking and you've had the career you've had, that's brilliant for people like me who also find networking really difficult. So it's again just a brilliant example of solution-focused problem solving. So yes, a lot of disabled people struggle to make contacts in the kind of traditional ways and down the pub or at parties. And so some geniuses in Manchester, led by the dazzling Shirley Houston and Melissa Johns, among others, decided that they were going to focus on this unmet need, which was that there was a bunch of brilliant disabled people who couldn't get in front of the industry, and there was a bunch of industry people who really wanted to meet disabled talent. So they set up DANC, Disabled Artists Networking Community, DANC_UK on Twitter, at DANC_UK, follow them right now. If you don't know who they are, follow them right now. They will change your life. They're amazing. I was very aware that, you know, networking wasn't going to be part of my career. And I came across them on social media, which, by the way, social media is a very valid form of networking that is accessible to a lot of disabled people. I came across DANC. I saw that they were doing an event in London. They had a brilliant one just before lockdown that was at ITV. And I actually attended an event, met a very brilliant person who was sort of charged with diversity at Endemol Shine, sent her a sample, the sample got sent around, met a producer, and that was my first script option, which happened directly as a result of DANC setting up a networking event. So these brilliant, sometimes if you don't know the solution to a problem, there is somebody brilliant out there who has actually found it, and DANC are just the most extraordinary example of that. And they really are, I think DANC is the answer to basically every problem. Every problem is solved by DANC.
Awesome, awesome. Long live DANC. David, you've got some stuff to say about this too.
Yeah, well, I think it falls into two things. I think DANC is brilliant and it's a support network, and I would encourage any disabled writer or creative to find your support network. But I think the other side of it is that I feared that there was parties going on that if I didn't show up to in London, I wouldn't work. And to be honest, I've stopped caring this year in COVID, because it's just, I mean, look at Annalisa. Just because you're not going to party, it does not impede a career at all. So I think we need to stop panicking and just you know, and also don't be, you know, let's not be apologetic about what we need as artists as well. You know, I spent so much time going down to London on that train. I was making myself ill. And I really thought that my career lied in being at a party drinking Merlot at 2 o'clock in the morning somewhere in Soho, and it really, really doesn't. You know, if I'm not strapped to this computer, I'm not earning. So if anything, if you're worried about it, find yourself a token able-bodied producer and send them off to the party. You know, just kind of weaponize them, you know, let them go and drink the Merlot while you're comfortable at home doing the right thing about your disability. But I think support network is actually more important. Find people where you can ring them up, like Annalisa, and go, oh my God, we didn't get that commission. And she can go, I completely know how you feel. And people that can pick you up. So I think this is just absolutely brilliant, and growing your support network of creatives and is great. But don't worry, but you know, people's budgets, you know, things aren't being commissioned at parties, they're being commissioned at probably meals, and you won't be invited to that anyway because they're fancy meals and they're being schmoozed. So find yourself somebody to go and schmooze them while you're tucked at home, you know, with a cup of tea and a biscuit. Because it's I've sacrificed so much of my health thinking that I needed to do something and I needed to adapt to how they were. No, they need to adapt to how I am and my needs as a creative. So
that's so brilliant and so right. And yes, I've never gone to any of these parties, if that means anything to anyone. And when I have, I've left early or hidden in the toilet. I once hid in the toilet for 45 minutes at a party because they were so excruciating. Anyway, on to the next question. Cultural consultancy. So the idea that a writer is going, I want to write about the disabled experience. I have never met a disabled person before. I want to hire a disabled person to be my friend and teach me everything that I need to know. Is a thing that seems to be happening again and again and again. There was a brilliant thing that happened during the Black Lives Matter. There was just a tweet that I read where I think it was a Latina writer just going, I have been panic sent about 15 scripts by Hollywood who are desperate to have me rewrite the scripts, and they were the scripts that I was previously hired to consult on. And it's problematic. It's really, really problematic. And I know of people on this Zoom who have been abused by that system. And hopefully it's starting to change, but yeah. Charlie, why don't you talk about it and what it all, yeah.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think it's a really big issue, and it's a big, for me, I think it's a really big risk for all writers from a minority, really, and for disabled writers. I think in the last few years, obviously, there's been a lot more ambition maybe to increase the number of disabled projects, disabled people on screen, disabled people behind the screen. And one thing that I've come to kind of notice, certainly last year or two, I run a blog called Limping Chicken for deaf people. And so a lot of people seem to find me when they need something deaf related. And I just started to get an email every week or two, you know, asking me whether I'd help to, you know, someone who is non-deaf wanted to write about a deaf character and wanted me to answer loads of questions about it. And I used to spend a lot of time doing that. And then it became, you know, it just, that kind of grew and grew. And I think that you can just start to feel like people, yeah, what was interesting is I was obviously developing as a writer myself, but I found that very few people were maybe contacting me and asking if I wanted to actually collaborate or to kind of develop something together maybe, or get to know them, or it was always a bit like what they could maybe get from me, as opposed to what we could maybe do together. And so it felt like my actual experience or my ability as a writer, which was developing, didn't seem to necessarily be as much a part of it as, you know, being someone with a background in deafness, knowing about deafness. But I've also had experiences where I've been involved in projects that I've kind of originated or I've been a big part of developing. And then as the project's gone further, my involvement's become less. And so it's a bit like again, I would say almost like they've almost got what they wanted from me. They've got that kind of, they feel like they've ticked the box, or they've got the authenticity because they've had me involved. But then when it got further down the line, it became more like, well, let's use the experienced people. And suddenly I wasn't really able to put my ideas forward or be involved as much anymore. I think that as my career's developed, now I'm in a bit of a stronger position because I've got more sort of stronger credits behind me. And I feel in a way a bit more confident myself to kind of stand my own ground, because I think that's part of it too, that maybe when you're starting out, you don't necessarily have that massive confidence to be like, no, you know, I really should be in that room, or I should be part of that discussion. But the more you do, the more you do feel like you can stand up for yourself a bit more. But it's a really complex area, and you know, clearly you do want people to tell more stories with deaf or disabled characters in them, but you also feel like it's really important what's going on behind the camera and who's involved and involving us. And there's that saying, you know, nothing about us without us. And I do really believe in that. But I think it's genuine involvement is just really important, that it's got some kind of real substance behind it.
Yeah, I always say it's the question of authorship, not authenticity. That if you want to have disabled talent involved, you know, that there's nothing saying that you shouldn't tell disabled stories. But if you want something like that, if you want to do something like that, then you need to empower someone to be an author with you of the project, rather than adopt their authenticity, rather than steal their authenticity from them and then go, oh yes, and this is, you know, and look, I used Charlie. Look, Charlie, like, he's got the credit. If you look very carefully when the scroll down, he's got a credit there. So we've absolutely protected ourselves. And yeah, it's I had an argument about that on Twitter just yesterday. Yes.
Well, just to say, I mean, that's the other side of it, is actually ending up, for me, I ended up not being credited, being forgotten in the credits as well. And then you're kind of like, well, wow, you know, after that experience, and then you're not even, you know, credited too. It was a bit, that's when it kind of hit home, really. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jack, but it was just I just wanted to say that actually, that you can even end up at that point, you know, you're not even recognised at the very end of it. And then you just think, God, what's going on there? And you feel a bit like, well, why did I bother particularly? Why did I? Because you feel a bit like you're giving something, but you don't want to just give and have it taken, and then that people are just taking from you, aren't they? It's a complex area, and I think you're always just weighing it all up. You're weighing up a lot of factors. It's not like a black and white thing all the time, but I fully agree with what you said about authorship, for sure.
Brilliant. So let's move on to the next question. Another concern for disabled writers is pigeonholing. And that thing of going, you're a disabled writer, so therefore you must write about the disabled experience and nothing but the disabled experience, so help you God. How do you guard against becoming limited by how you present? Sukey, why don't you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, this is really interesting to me, because I'm Sukey Fisher. I write mainly for cinema and also some TV. I have two disabilities. I have a very easy to label one. I'm paraplegic, I use a wheelchair. And I have ME, which in the time I've been a professional writer, which is coming up 20 years, has varied between moderate and severe. This is moderate, this is not a bad time. I find people can pigeonhole me because I'm in a wheelchair, so I can talk about that. I don't get very pigeonholed because I didn't come into the business identifying as disabled, because I didn't dare. So I'm very conscious that when I see the experience of, maybe, I suppose I count as mid-career, earlier career writers than me, it is different, because there is actually a place to be a disabled writer. 20 years ago, there really wasn't very much. And when we come on to talk about Disability Discrimination Act and, you know, what's the impact been, actually things like that have had an impact. So when I started out, I got severe ME, large debts, profound confidence issue as a writer, and was very bad at being single-minded. And essentially, I couldn't tell people how bad it was. I depended a lot on a couple of lucky friendships. But if anything moved beyond that, even trying to get an agent in the first couple of years, and then when I'd sold scripts, I was just agenting myself. But I couldn't go and see an agent because I was essentially working from bed. And I had a concentration window of about 3 or 4 hours a day. And that's all right, that's just what happened. And in fact, it made me single-minded. And eventually much more confident about learning to do a job properly. But then I found I got pigeonholed as I gradually stopped saying to people, I've got flu. Yeah, I had flu 6 weeks ago, but I've got flu again. Well, I've got cold actually, you know, and just fairly light bullshitting. And as I did start to come out to people and say, look, I really just can't do meetings. I can do conference calls, but only on a good day. And it might be a week till I can do another one. And I seemed to be sort of, you know, producing work that was learning to be okay. But I found a huge number of things I just couldn't get put up for or think about. I could never have gone into a writer's room. So, you know, that route into the business just wasn't there for me. So there is one reason, one of the reasons for features is because you're left to your own devices a great deal more, and it's much less pressured. And I'm very conscious that there were jobs I was in conversations about, but because I couldn't be met in the ordinary way, or if I invited someone, you know, come up and have lunch, they didn't know I was going to be in bed for 4 days afterwards for putting a very simple lunch on the table, because that's what ME does. And, you know, you are reliant on your pacing system. So it wasn't in any sense a positive pigeonhole, except for one writer who, producer, who said, will you write something about it? I said, Rick, do you actually want to hear this? Because it's very, very, very boring. And so she was saying, but you know, isn't there a diving a bell and a butterfly in here? Isn't there a singing detective? And I'm like, no, because I wouldn't remember what I'd been thinking about 20 minutes later. So, you know, the whole point is you can't construct thoughts. So for me, as I said, it's funny, my chair, had I been starting out in the chair, or, you know, visibly in the chair, would have pigeonholed me a lot more than I think it has. And that my ME is now a pigeonhole that I'm really working to break out of as a writer who kind of can't be met. So I go mad, and actually if I can go to a party and I can hustle and I can do something like this, it's a very conscious effort to do that and say, I am available, I'm up to do interesting things as well as my own stuff. So, as I say, I hope that's a useful answer from kind of mid-career.
Really, really useful answer. Miranda, can you talk about this too?
Yes, I'm Miranda, and I write comedy and drama for TV, for stage and for radio. And I write quite a big range of things, from CBeebies and CBBC to musicals. I'm writing on topical panel shows. So I haven't found too much of a problem with being pigeonholed at all, although I did start off with theatre, which I still write for now and love to write for. I was commissioned to write 4 stage plays that are about disability. They weren't about my disability, but those commissions, interestingly, all found me. They weren't things that I had pitched. And I've also written one for radio, but that doesn't seem to have had an impact on other things that I've been able to write. And I think it's because of the scripts that I've chosen to develop for myself and the way that I've chosen to present myself in the industry. So I want to write a range of work, and I'm happy to write about disability, but I also want to write a whole full spectrum of scripts. And so I make sure that I've got those pitches and that I've got those spec scripts, and that I present myself in the industry in that way. And I think that that's probably been the key. At the moment, I'm writing a comedy drama script that does feature somebody who has the same disability as me, but it's the first time that I've written about it. And I'm doing it now after a lot of years because I feel like it now, and I didn't feel like writing about that before. So it's just something that I feel the time is right to do. Yeah, so I think that's all I've got to add, really. Sukey covered a lot of it. I think it's about the way you decide to present yourself. And I guess I also think that if you're being commissioned to write work about disability, that's brilliant, you're being commissioned. And I think any foothold is a foothold and somewhere to work from. So I think that there's an opportunity, if you're making connections with people who are commissioning you for that work, to send them pitches for other sorts of work that you'd like to write, and hope to open up the doors and cut through in that way.
Brilliant, brilliant. I mean, it's so interesting, that question as to when we're ready to write about ourselves too. And that thing of, if you are a disabled writer, suddenly it's like, yes, you're going to write about someone who uses a wheelchair when you're not ready to write about that, because you're not ready to write about yourself yet. You need to write about other people because, you know, and it's so, you know, it's such an interesting thing. Anyway, how do we blow the doors off? The Disability Discrimination Act is quite old this year, and was and is an important flag in the landscape. I'm writing a drama with Genevieve Parr about this. It's also a very problematic piece of legislation, but that's for another day. How do we challenge institutional ableism in our industry? What is it going to take, and how do we, as fighters, fight this fight? David, do you want to talk about what you're doing at BAFTA?
Yeah, thanks. Well, BAFTA did a big review of all different diversity on the back of last year, and have made I think well over 100 different amendments to the film awards and to different parts of BAFTA, and it came off the back of some very, very bad testimony from disabled artists and other people. And actually, the disabled artists that gave testimony actually made some of the board members of BAFTA cry. It was very stark what they were told. So they've adopted, they've basically adopted a number of changes which are already out there as part of the review. But the work that I'm trying to do is to really point out the indirect discrimination that exists. Like when we say phrases like, we want somebody experienced, are you automatically treating disabled people unfavorably because they haven't had as much opportunity to be experienced? And I think so it's kind of trying to break down barriers like that, where they might not necessarily be thinking that they're discriminating, but yet the actual rules and the things they've put in place automatically make us unfavorable. But I also think that we're artists first as well, you know, and that's something I've really remembered this year, is that my job is not to be an advocate, my job is to be an artist. And so the advocacy should be a small part of what I do in my day, but unfortunately for a lot of us, it's the main thing that we do in our day. So it's kind of a call to action really for us to go, we're creatives first, and the more we're forced into being an advocate, the less time we've got to knock on their door and ask for a commission. So we should be mindful to the best vengeance we can have is to create amazing content. And of that advocacy as well, access, yes, it's important, but attitudes is actually more important. So access is a legal requirement and you should know what you're doing. Attitudes is probably better to spend time talking to. And also this thing that we get caught up in how we refer to each other. And that actually takes away from, while you're asking me how you should refer to me, I'd more rather talk about my rights and you understanding my rights and my equal rights. So I think there's quite a lot of barriers that are in there, that are institutional barriers that we need to break down, but we just need to call them out very respectfully and say, look, you know, this funding scheme, the way you've designed it puts it as a disadvantage. Can you sort it out? So, but it's little bits. And I think the more creatives are creating amazing disabled-led content, walking into the BBC, walking into Channel 4, going, right, we want to make this. There's only so long that they can say no to absolutely everybody if it's a tidal wave of creatives going in there, getting their funding. And I think that's probably when they're getting 10, 20 different disabled-led projects through the door, you have to stop saying things like, well, we can't develop that, we've already got one. You know, when you're seeing the ratio of what's coming through the door and it's 20% disabled, they'll have to up what they're doing because they physically can't say no to more of us. So I think it's a call to arms for everybody to go, don't let them distract you by your day just being advocacy. Yes, do that because it's brilliant and together we can roar, but let's just make amazing content and smash it.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Nicky.
Hi, yeah, I just found that fascinating what David was saying. Thank you. So speaking from a neurodivergent perspective and from my natural optimism, I do think the doors are being slowly dismantled. When I started being commissioned professionally for my plays in 2003, there were no groups for neurodivergent writers and creatives, no schemes, no industry awareness. Neurodivergency was rarely included in disability contexts and debates in the sector. No one had heard of dyspraxia. People knew about autism, which they still equated with the Rain Man, and everyone knew that dyslexia means you can't spell without having any sense of the complexity of the condition. So now it is different. There are organisations that support and represent neurodivergent writers. There are all these schemes that we've been talking about for writers. So to be optimistic, I think it is improving, but there needs to be better representation at all levels. And, you know, it's not just writers. I've done a lot of work with neurodivergent actors who feel absolutely let down by the audition process. So people who can't audition, but, you know, they'd be really good if they got the part, but to go through the audition process is just a huge barrier. But that's a different topic. So I guess I'm saying raising awareness of neurodivergency is really important. I think there needs to be more consultation with neurodivergent writers and addressing their needs. And this is true of all writers and of probably all disabled writers, that really all we want to do is get on with the writing. But there are so many barriers that stop us doing that, certainly neurodivergent writers. And, you know, that there's a huge irony for me that the barrier is not the writing itself, it's the face-to-face meetings, it's the organisation, it's networking, it's being social media savvy. You know, all of those things aren't actually to do with whether I can write a script or not, but they are barriers to whether I might get work or not get work. While I totally agree with everything David said about advocacy, I think there are two sides of it. In that, as a neurodivergent writer, I feel a responsibility to educate people I work with for all those reasons I was saying, that people just don't understand yet enough about neurodivergency. And I really like the phrase to adopt help-seeking behaviours. You know, as a neurodivergent writer, I think I need to do that, but also that the industry has a responsibility to respond to that. At the moment, I'm really encouraged because for the first time ever, there's an all-party parliamentary group, for which I've given evidence to, on neurodivergency and dyspraxia. So I'm really hopeful that big things will come of that, and it's led by two MPs who are themselves neurodivergent from different parties. So I'm hopeful things will come out of that, which will perhaps filter down to other sectors, including ours. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. One thing I'm noticing in the chat, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, but the amazing thing, and it happens every time there is when I'm part of these disabled forums, is that so much of it comes about testimony. And it's absolutely beautiful hearing people's stories about what they've gone through and the fights they've had. You don't get that in normal, I mean, normal ones like this, you get like, how do I get an agent, da, da, da. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, and it's much more sort of people sharing their personal experiences, and it's absolutely beautiful. So thank you for everyone that's doing that. I'm aware we're running out of time, so the next question might need slightly shorter answers. So the final question before we go into our quick fire round is how often have you lied about your disability in order to secure work, and what are the barriers for those with hidden disabilities? Miranda.
So I haven't exactly lied, I've omitted. If I'm asked if I'm disabled, I've always said yes, but the most common question put to me as a potential writer on a project is whether I have any access needs, and I don't. So then whether or not to mention disability is up to me. When people meet me, they'll notice the visual difference to my face, but they won't be aware of the hidden disability I also have, which is more impactful in my life. And I often did used to avoid mentioning it because I was worried that people would doubt my reliability, especially with deadlines, and especially because I was writing on topical panel shows. So often you might be required to write 24 jokes in 2 hours on a specific subject, and the show's being recorded tonight, so you have to deliver. So it was a bit of self-preservation. I was worried about that. But now, along with lots of other information about who I am and what I can do, it says on my CV and on my agent's website that I can write about disability and visual difference with an authentic voice drawing on lived experience, because I recognise that as one of my strengths and something that I bring to my work. Although I'm newer to TV, I've worked in theatre for a long time now, so I do have the confidence of knowing that that's written there, also with the list of credits, that makes me feel a bit more secure. But things have moved on now, and I do think things are opening up. There's a long way to go, but things are getting better. So if I was just starting out now in TV from scratch, I would feel bolder about owning that from the onset, I think.
Brilliant, brilliant. Sukey, yeah.
I've kind of done the lying. I don't know why lying keeps looking at me. A lot of lies of omission, you know, and I think it's very hard as well. When I started out, I thought I was going to be selling myself as a producer writer. And so if I was producing shorts, promos, video game things, I had to be insured all the time. So my medical records were full of omissions because I didn't dare be uninsurable. And, you know, when I finally got a proper ME diagnosis, I did it privately and just kept it off the record. And I hate having to work like that because I think some people can kind of, you know, energize the way they work like that. But I'm used to working very openly with small groups of people, as you do in this business. And I think it actually made me a worse writer, not being able to be open. So I actually think that had a negative result really for my writing and I mean, it's not, I hope there now, but it was certainly a big issue starting out. And exactly as Miranda said, it's just fear. It's simply fear of not getting hired and fear of being unreliable. And, you know, I'm in a small ME relapse at the moment. I'm working on a quite pressured thing, and I'm hysterical about not hitting small deadlines. I just make sure everything is hit bang and wouldn't dare give a sick note. And, you know, that goes deep, and I don't think it makes you work well. And I'll never know how much that was pressure I was putting on myself or pressure I felt other people were putting on. And again, you know, if I were in my 30s and starting out now, not my 50s, I don't know how different that would feel.
I hear you. I hear you. If it's okay with the panel, I think we should pause the quickfire questions until maybe slightly later, so that people have got the opportunity to actually have asked questions. Because I'm worried that they won't get that chance. Though that now leads Tom looking incredibly panicked as he's going, what questions should I ask? What is there a good one to ask first, Tom?
They're in your inbox now, Jack.
They're in my inbox now.
With you.
My inbox. Right, okay, great. Are they?
They should be.
Yes, they are. Brilliant. Okay, so Laurelie Thomas asks, would love some guidance with pitching to channels when you're from an ADHD or non-neurotypical intellectual background. Just wondered whether there are ways to increase accessibility on that front, as it can be an extra challenge approaching producers, agents and commissioners on email when you have ADHD. It takes days to write a query letter that doesn't sound unfocused and like a tsunami of ideas. Nicky, would you be okay answering that?
Yeah, I'd love to answer it. I'm not sure how helpful I can be because most of my experience is in theatre and I'm just exploring radio and TV myself really and coming across exactly all of those barriers, you know, which is why I think there really is a case for having some sort of neurodivergent consultancy and support there for neurodivergent writers and artists with exactly these sorts of issues. That's not terribly helpful, but I think it's the best I can do.
Well, I've written a lot of pitches and a lot of emails to producers, and my long-term script editor is actually on this Zoom, who is someone that has got some incredibly badly focused emails from me in my time, and mad emails. I would say that you've just try and be as clear as you can, and try and be as upfront as you can about who you are at the beginning of it, and embrace the fact that you are going to be less neurotypical than the most writers they deal with, and how that is an advantage to them in some situations, and don't be frightened of it, I would say, and don't take days over it, because that will just be exhausting. Just go, this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to present. And there are people in TV who will not respond well to that, but there are a lot of people in TV that will respond incredibly well to that. So trust that those people are out there, and those are the people you want to work with anyway, not the arseholes. So yes, that's what I'd say. Next question. Lots of chats about broadcasters saying we've already got a disability story, we can't have two. What changes would the panel like to see to the commissioning process? Charlie, would you like to take a first stab at that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think there was some discussion in the chat, and one thing that I raised is that I remember talking to somebody who was kind of head of development at a production company, and they had a project with a deaf character in, and I'd been involved with giving them some pointers about, you know, deafness as these things go, and then they'd actually found a writer who was deaf to be one of the writers on this project. Maybe it had 8 episodes or something, and we were talking, and I said, well, I'd love to pitch as well, or I'd love to be part of it. And she said, oh, we've already got one. We've already got a deaf writer. And I just remember sort of being quite taken aback, and I just quickly said back, well, why don't you have 2? You know, what is this kind of, you've got one place and that's it, you know? And it was, yeah, just really strange comment. And there was somebody who actually had spent a lot of time around disabled, she kept coming to kind of events and things, and I thought was really kind of with it and clued up and everything. And then in that moment, and I remember she suddenly was really embarrassed as well, because she sort of realized what she said. I think a lot of this is sort of sometimes just it's general awareness as well, but I do think there's perhaps this perspective in the industry a bit like, you know, you have one box for maybe a disabled project and one box for maybe another type of project, and it doesn't seem to be, yeah, I mean, maybe I think there is still perhaps a tick box kind of attitude within the industry, and they see it in that way. And I think what we need is a cultural change, really. You know, perhaps people need to be told this, you know, that you should just be, you're not limited. If you've got maybe some kind of target, but it doesn't mean you just put one thing in that target. You should be open to doing 2 or 3 things if there's projects that are worthy of it. I hope that answers the question and gives a sense of it.
Is there anyone else on the panel who would like to speak to that? Yeah, Sukey.
Yeah, just briefly, because it's the same answer, almost word for word, that we've had talking to BLM people, talking to other writers of colour, because there's hardly anyone behind the desk on the other side who's us. And until that structural change begins to happen, we're exhausted, we're different, we're a project, and some of us will be lucky and fight our way through that. We are the lucky ones on this panel. There are twice as many writers, probably as good as us or better, who are going to be silenced. And it's principally because I know a couple of neurodivergent people on the other side of the desk, and I know a couple of disabled people, but it's a tiny proportion. Until we can begin to change that, until we've got proper, simple protocols, codes of conduct, people have actually done unconscious bias training, which drags 1,000 years behind, then, you know, we're dependent on lucky individuals, which is something all of us would say in different ways. I know that, you know, we've got where we've got because we met some good people, but we might well not have met the good people. That's far too random. Sorry, that's a long answer. No,
it's a brilliant answer and the right answer, and it's a real, you know, and it's going to be interesting, you know, the massive success of I May Destroy You hopefully will lead to a lot of other dramas like I May Destroy You, and, you know, fingers crossed, the disabled version of I May Destroy You in terms of a drama with that much power and identity behind it is coming down the tracks. But yeah, it's not there yet. It's not there yet. Shakar asks, how does a disabled person overcome another major barrier, racism? I am of British, Asian, Indian heritage and have constantly been unable to get through to the establishment. I have written and directed my own work using my own monies. I'm afraid to say I've come across racism in disability creative community too, which makes me wary of seeking out people who understand. Who on the panel would like to talk to that?
I don't mind jumping in and saying we should definitely lead by example. And where we talk about intersectionality, in terms of commissioners, it just blows the mind. If they're struggling to kind of understand one characteristic of society, they're not going to understand multiple characteristics. And especially if you throw working class in there as well, they just have no way of computing. It breaks the matrix. But I think you're completely right. We need to lead by example. And if there's anything we can do to elevate anyone's voice, yeah, we need to be doing that. But we need to have a strong check of ourselves to make sure that I did unconscious bias training the other day, and I didn't think I was unconsciously biased. But then they showed this thing about gender, and it's basically they show you this clip about somebody saying about a doctor and different stuff, and what it's all about how your brain has been programmed. So even though you might not feel that you're biased, you've lived in a world that's kind of just flashed different things at you, and in that moment your brain just pulls from areas that you're not conscious of. And it was incredibly amazing for me to go through that, because I thought, oh, I'm not biased, but everyone is. And I think that it's hugely important that we come together as one cohesive unit, inclusive of all, because if not, it's just we want to show the industry the power of the disabled writer's voice, and the intersectionality of that is absolutely at the heart.
Brilliant, brilliant. Nicky asks, since coming out about my invisible disability, I'm only being commissioned to write the disabled episode, regardless of what the disability is, or and whether or not I want to write it. I've also experienced profound ableism in writers' rooms. I felt unable to raise this later. I felt unable to raise this later as I worry I won't be commissioned again in the future. Do you have any advice on how you would approach this if it was you? Miranda, could you speak to this at all?
I don't know if I'm the best person to ask, because I've not been in writers' rooms where episodes of continuing dramas or anything have been being created. But it is a problem, isn't it? And we do hear it come up time and time again. I think I've also heard it said not very long ago, and felt incredibly angry when it was suggested to me that disabled people would be there to write disabled stories. I think if you're actually in that situation, if you've got an agent, I think it's great to have them step in and help and be a buffer to have those difficult conversations for you without ruining relationships, hopefully. But again, I think it's perhaps just about pitching and pitching and pitching, and not letting them say you can't write those stories, by keep proving that you can, I guess, and keep coming up with them and try and get, if they won't listen, try other shows, try other places. Because if you're already writing on one show, you've got that experience behind you now. So hopefully it might be a bit easier to traverse onto something else. Someone else might also have an idea.
I'm happy to jump in on that from personal experience. Sometimes your disability can be the reason that you get into a room or that a producer wants to speak to you. I think all writers have their sort of USPs or whatever it is about them that people are interested in. And my very first radio commission came as a result. I wrote a piece in The Independent, a personal piece about sight loss, and a wonderful radio producer took me out and said she wanted to turn it into a play. And I had no intention of writing that play whatsoever. But I did want to write a play about a guy who'd fallen out of an aeroplane and died splat in the middle of a suburban street. And I was far more interested in writing that play. And I managed in the course of my meeting to persuade her that was a brilliant idea. She really liked it. She put it in front of the commissioner, it got commissioned. So I kind of think sometimes you have to just understand that your disability might end up being a reason that you get in the room, but don't pigeonhole yourself, because if there's something you're burning to write, don't tell yourself that you can't be writing that or you can't be pitching that. I think if you're dealing with a producer who only wants you to write your personal story about your disability, then I'm not sure you should be working with that producer. And I think it's about having those personal boundaries and not sort of self-excluding or self-limiting if you can possibly help it.
I think Annalisa is absolutely right. Don't pigeonhole yourself first. I think that's absolutely it.
I was just hoping to add, sorry if I'm interrupting anybody, but I think one thing that I find really useful increasingly is to actually to say more at the very beginning about what my needs are. Being partially deaf, it will be communication. So it's I often, if I'm in a writer's room, I would have communication support, like pantypists who type everything at the same time as the discussion's happening, or sometimes interpreters. But the more that I'm clear up front, like sometimes I'll say, you know, I might need a break more frequently because of the communication demands of following communication with a delay and through a third party. But I'll try and say as much as I can up front without without making it seem like I come with lots of issues. But the more that I do that, I find people are kind of more prepared for that, or to know that my experience is going to be different, or I'm going to come in a different way to other people. And that does seem to help a great deal compared to not saying so much, which is what I used to do, and then finding things very difficult and then trying to say, oh, well, actually, I kind of needed this or I needed that, but it's a bit too late perhaps. So yeah, I found, trying to say more up front is something that I find helpful.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to do these quick fire questions. One thing I'd say about this, the chat box, is do everyone, if you have a chance, just do scroll through it, because like I said, the best thing in it is everyone talking about their own stories, and there's so many lovely stories in there. So do dip in. So there are these quick fire final questions that everyone's got to answer in one sentence or less. If you can do it in one word, then you win sweets from David Proud. Name one thing a colleague could do for you that would immediately improve your working life. Let's just go around in a circle. Annalisa.
Keep Zoom on the table as a way of doing meetings in the post-COVID world.
Brilliant. Sukey.
Make me feel safe.
Wow. Miranda.
Mine is also don't forget Zoom exists after COVID.
Tom.
Don't forget Zoom again. Sorry.
Wow. David.
Make it fun. Make me laugh.
Charlie, sorry.
Oh, hi. Yeah, it would be to communicate clearly and to give me some sense of what people are talking about. And if there's a party that I haven't heard about, just making sure that I know, because I'd really like to go to it.
Brilliant. I love I set that up for you by communicating so badly that it was, yeah, anyway. Nicky.
Right now, tidy my desk.
Next question. Who are your industry role models? Annalisa.
Jess Tom of Tourette's Hero.
Yeah.
She models disability pride like no one I've ever met. She's an amazing advocate. Follow her immediately. The world is a better place for Jess Tom and Matt Pultney at Tourette's Hero.
Awesome. Sukey.
It's my age, Elaine Morgan. Absolutely wonderful woman TV playwright I watched as a child. Totally forgotten, fantastic. Please watch her, go and find her. She's marvellous.
Awesome. Miranda.
Victoria Wood, because she could absolutely do it all. And we know now from her recent biography that she was writing through serious illness too.
Tom.
Jenny Seeley, the artistic director of Grey Eye.
And so say all of us. David.
In terms of writing, Lucy Gannon, who's just absolutely amazing. In terms of producing, I'm going to really embarrass him. But Ewan Marshall, who's, if any of us are giants, it's because we're standing on his shoulders. And any chance to say it, forgive me, Ewan, but I have to say it.
Yeah, he's here somewhere. You'll see him. I saw him just poke his head up a moment. Charlie.
Yeah, I really love the work of Sally Wainwright. But I think you, Jack, as well, you're big kind of, because of your range of work and also how you've involved disability in so much of it in different sorts of platforms and, you know, I mean, theatre, TV, and how hard you must be working. So, yeah, so you, Jack.
That's very nice. Very nice. Nicky.
Also, Jenny Seeley at Grey Eye, who gave me the confidence to be open about my disability. Also, you, Jack, and also all my panelists here, you know, all the panelists who, you know, just find you guys really inspiring.
Awesome. How has being disabled made you a better writer? Annalisa.
I am a problem solver because I have to solve about 9 problems before I even brush my teeth in the morning. And I think that definitely makes me a better writer.
Awesome. Sukey.
I needed the definition it gave me.
Miranda.
And I think it makes me more perceptive.
Love it. Tom.
Better at making stuff up, innit?
David.
I've lived in my imagination for years. I couldn't always go over that hill or climb up that thing, but I imagine what the view is like from it. So now I get to show everyone else my view.
Beautiful. Charlie.
I think for me, I was seeing the world from a different angle, and I sort of grew up in a deaf family, but also went to sort of mainstream school. So I was with deaf and hearing people and sort of seeing the differences in how they perceived each other. So I think, yeah, just giving you a different perspective on the world for sure.
Nicky.
Something about being an outsider, because I felt an outsider all my life, and then bringing that perspective to my work. So not just about disability, but about more general marginalised experience.
Brilliant. And what a note to end on. I'm now passing back to Kate, who has stuff to tell us, I think.
Thank you, everyone, for what was just a really inspiring session. And I think this is only the start. I really feel that we're going to have many more Zooms like this, and we hope that you will attend many more of these, because I think this conversation is just a tip of the iceberg. I just want to thank you all for coming, and to say, you know, we are at the Guild welcome anyone to get involved, to become more engaged in our activities. It's only from hearing from you, from sharing experiences, that we can really improve the lot of writers across the board. If you are interested in signing up, please go to our website, have a look, see what you think about it.